Hello, everyone out there in the CultureCon community and abroad. I am Dr. Dante Vaughn, and I am excited to record this webinar. For those of you who attended the live webinar, thank you for attending. And for those of you who could not attend, you have an opportunity to now listen to an abridged version of that presentation brought to you by me, Dr. Dante Vaughn, with LightPoint Advisors. This webinar is focused on bridging the generational divide, strategies for effective multi-generational leadership. We are in a time, in a day, and an age where our workforce construct includes at least three, if not four or more generations of workers all coming together, working toward a strategic mission, vision, direction. How do we do that effectively? How do we consider the intricacies and the nuances of what's required for us to thrive as a multi-generational workforce, striving toward a similar purpose and outcomes as an organization? That's what we're here to talk about today. And as always, any follow-up questions, thoughts, ideas, be sure to leverage the contact information we have at the end of this presentation, and we can expand the dialogue from there. For those of you who do not know who I am, I'm Dr. Dante Vaughn with LightPoint Advisors. I'm the founder and president, and I specialize in all things organizational leadership and growth centric. My firm, under my leadership, drives organizations in helping them progress their strategic vision, both in their organizational construct and around how they lead the business, how their leaders engage, how they interact, how they make decisions that impact business performance, that impact the lives that they touch every day. Our firm is brought in to help optimize and drive improvement around those things. Much of our work is underpinned by industrial organizational psychology principles, by lean management principles, but most importantly, by the fundamentals of what we understand to be essential from an organizational leadership perspective, those best practices that have contributed to the success for so many organizations nationally and globally. I'm blessed to have an opportunity to serve as a strategist, as an executive coach, and as a thought leader in that regard. With that being said, I'm excited about the opportunity for this webinar. So let's get after it. When we're talking about bridging the generational divide, this is all about how do I apply actionable strategies in my workplace to ensure, as a business leader, as a peer, as a practitioner, how do I ensure I not only understand the landscape of what it means to be multi-generational, but how do I actually effectively lead within those multi-generational constructs and then really turn this multi-generational environment or experience into something that becomes an advantage for my business? How do I take that and use it effectively and not see it as a barrier? So we're going to unpack a lot of ideas and best practices as it relates to bridging that divide. I think it's important to first get in alignment around what it means when I say, or we all share the definition of multi-generational workforce, just to make sure we're all speaking the same language. As we think about multi-generationals, and you'll hear reference to the boomer generation, the X generation, the Y, the Z, what does all that mean? Any workplace that includes employees from any multitude of generations, bringing their unique experiences, their perspectives, their ideas, their communication and work styles, that is what constructs a multi-generational workforce. Pretty simple, right? If I'm coming from that generation, there are factors that influence how I think, how I communicate, how I see the world, and how I receive the world. And that's what we're here to unpack, just some nuances. It doesn't mean it's all encompassing. It doesn't mean it's exact or precise. It means it gives us enough to chew on where we say, maybe I should approach my communication this way, or maybe I should consider this factor as it relates to how my team is interacting with one another, especially as I'm seeking to optimize that experience. As many of you know, I work with organizations nationally and globally. In fact, I'm in the field right now. I don't know if my background is blurred or not, but I'm actually taking this recording while in the field. And in all of the work that I and my team members perform, we encounter people from different generations. And the idea and the question we should all ask ourselves is how can we realize and maximize the benefits of it? And not seeing it necessarily as a barrier or even as a nuance that we can't avoid, but as a strategic opportunity for oneself and for the business at large. And the reality is, multi generational workplaces provide us this unique opportunity to leverage diverse perspectives to drive ideation and innovation across an organization that otherwise wouldn't exist. Organizations that were kind of bred up with similar people from similar generations over multiple years, while that in and of itself establishes a lot of loyalty and consistency and legacy knowledge, what we miss the opportunity is really centered around the fact that having people from multiple generations providing perspective, insight, experiences, both in the field, in the industry, and abroad, that creates new ideation, new perspectives, new knowledge sharing in a way that equips an organization. If you leverage it effectively, if you solicit it, if you draw it out, and if you use it, it gives you a lot of opportunity to drive the business forward in a progressive way. So when we talk about multi-generational workplace, how do we realize and maximize those benefits? Everything from the flexibilities that are realized through the diversification of that workforce to how individuals improve their collaboration, how they foster this higher probability of growth and succession and attrition, essentially creating this adaptability within the marketplace as a result of this multi-generational workforce. It should serve as competitive advantage for an organization. So how do we get there? Part one of this webinar really emphasizes the understanding of what it means in today's landscape to be or to lead a multi-generational workforce, right? We have to have foundational awareness and insight to being a multi-generational workforce. What does it all mean? How do we understand those generational nuances and really address the challenges? Some spoken, some unspoken, some seen, some unseen. So let's get after it. As I asked during the live presentation, and I want to challenge you all as you reflect for yourselves, what is your generation? I know what my generation is, and I'm going to reference that in a bit. What is your generation? What's your understanding of your generation? Take a couple seconds to think about that. What is my generation? Am I a boomer? Am I Gen Xer? Am I a millennial? What is your generation? Because the reality is, many of us tuning into this presentation and outside of this presentation come from variable generations. But I really want to hone in on four core generations that really represent the majority of the working population today: baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. Baby boomers are between those years of about 1946 to 1964 or so. Many of our parents, many of our grandparents may fall into that category. Gen Xers are somewhere between that 1965 to 1980. Many of you all on this call may fall into that category as well. And then you have millennial generation. Millennial generation is defined as anyone born between that 1981, to 1996 window. And then you have our Gen Zers. Gen Zers, that's our newest generation over the past, call it decade or so, 1996 to 2012. Now we have latter generations even beyond that, the newest of generations who are 18, in that 18 to early 20s range. But we're going to hone in on these four generations in the context of this presentation. Now I would be remiss if I didn't mention this micro generation, and I fall within this micro generation, the Zennial generation. Zennial with a X, like xylophone, Zennial generation. Sometimes folks hear Generation Z and thinks that is what we're referring to. It is not. The Zennial generation, as in XENNIALS, refers to this micro generation that us scholars and strategists discerned, because this micro generation, from a psychological and dispositional point of view, functions a bit differently than your traditional millennial generation. So while you saw those year ranges, early 80s, the reality is the Zennial generation grew up in an analog and really entered adulthood in a in a digital world. So we grew up analog, and then we experienced this transition to the digital world. Many of us were already in college before the most innovative and advanced thrust of leveraging the digital world really came to play. There's this blend of Gen X and millennial understanding, ideology, and even our approach to collaboration. It's important to understand that. I remember growing up in where you had carbon copiers, literal carbon copiers still in school, and you had the privilege of being asked to help make carbon copies for the classroom in the school office. Or I remember still clapping and erasers and using chalkboards. I remember transparent paper and projectors. That was the only form of any pseudo digital tool in the entire school. I remember when one school had one computer. That is a very different experience than what many of the traditional millennials encountered in their upbringing that shaped their mindset. So it's important for us Zennials to and for those leading as a Zennial and or leading Zennials to understand that this particular micro generation has had to be adapted through a lot of rapid technical and cultural shifts over our period of upbringing that has now carried forth in the Gen Z and latter generations. So keep that in mind as we unpack the reality of this multi-generational dynamic. So of those core generations, from the silent generation all the way through to Gen Z, this gives you a statistical context from the Department of Labor as reported by Wall Street Journal. Majority of the working population is somewhere between the age of 20 to about 59. Majority of the working population, and then it kind of diminishes as the older generation is now reaching a state of retirement. So you have a reduced number of boomers, and you have a growing number of millennial and younger generations. And as you see, a standout now within that is that Zennial micro generation, a standout being that this Gen X generation is now starting to shrink, when at one point they were the largest working population in the United States. So understanding this reality, what do we do with it? Here's another view of the US working population, just to give you some context to this gradual growth of the Gen Z population, this strength in the millennial population, the gradual decrease that we're starting to see among Gen Xers and, of course, baby boomers. That makes sense from a genealogical and timeline standpoint, but it doesn't change the fact that we have all these unique and diverse perspectives. So what do we do with all of that? So first, we have to understand that many of our barriers to navigating this multi-generational workforce centered around our own stereotypes and our own biases. So as part of a study conducted by the Vernon Group, they wanted to understand, okay, what are some misconceptions about each generation? And it's important for us to unpack those for ourselves, to self-reflect on, because how we lead these generations and how we respond in the midst of this multi-generational workforce has a lot to do with our intrinsic biases. So understanding stereotypes becomes essential to this desire to become more effective leaders and operators within the multi-generational dynamic. So, what do we talk about baby boomers? And oftentimes in today's day and age, the reality is of the sample population for this survey, majority either equated baby boomers as too old, to be too old to be working, too old to be performing certain tasks, and not tech savvy. And then, as you see, 35% had many other variations of stereotypes that were too vast or broad to even categorize. But the primary themes: too old, not tech savvy. How many of you have told yourself that about a baby boomer, coworker, colleague, partner in the business? Too old, doesn't understand the technology. It's okay to admit those personal biases. We've all had them. And what's being said about Gen X of this sample population? Over 33% indicated, oh, that's the lazy generation. They don't want to do anything. Also falling into that secondary, most frequent category, not tech savvy. Notice how the generations that weren't brought up in a digital or tech centered era are perceived as not tech savvy. And then there's a host of other stereotypes that exist under the Gen X population. Misconceptions of millennials. Oh, another lazy generation. They were raised by lazy people and now they're lazy. And looky here, entitled. How many times have we heard, oh, that generation's entitled? They believe everything should be handed to them. Everything should be, and they don't have to work for anything. Notice these common themes around stereotypes and misconceptions of generations. Let's look at another. I thought I had another. So, of those core stereotypes, how many of these stereotypes have you either heard of or believed to be true? All of them resonated with me. When I conducted this research and as I maintained a pulse on society as it relates to organizational culture, these stereotypes ring true. These biases ring true, not only in text, in surveys, but even as I listen to interviews, even as I listen to perspectives around consumerism and and the trajectory or trends or perceived trends in the workplace are influenced by these biases. So how do we take our understanding of these biases and say, okay, so while these stereotypes may exist, let me find space and a capacity to see beyond them or to solicit understanding about my workforce, my generational workforce. Because you may find within the midst of your workforce, those stereotypes or biases are untrue. So, how do we get after that? The reality is we have to reframe these generational stereotypes. Yes, there's some truth underpinning these only in the context that there are factors that may influence these perceptions. There may even be lived experiences we've had that suggest that these biases or stereotypes are true. Oh, my grandma, every time she tries to use the phone, she's calling me because she doesn't even know how to use a smartphone. She calls me every week asking me, what button do I press here? How do I check my voicemail? Our lived experiences shape these stereotypes, but how do we reframe them by embracing them as more of an opportunity than a barrier? How do we build a mutual understanding and through that foster better collaboration around this multi-generational workforce? A great book that I encourage you all to read was authored by Rochelle Ficardi, and she spoke to how to approach reframing these generational stereotypes. So how do we put that to action? And I think it's very important to see beyond. So first, let's understand each generation and what's really shaping them. And while there are many intricacies and complexities involved in trying to understand the stereotypes that have influenced each generation, let's just talk about them. I want to get beyond them. The reality is baby boomers are shaped by a post-war scenario. Imagine coming out of an upbringing or an environment that's that's responding to a post-war economy, that also sees an opportunity for progression and expansion from an industrial context, and has seen that through an organized, methodical, hierarchical construct, things can be executed and progress can be achieved. Imagine the importance to a baby boomer around hierarchy, structure, as a source of stability. Imagine as a baby boomer seeing your world through the lens that structure, consistency, loyalty is fundamental to survival. So, what are some motivators for a baby boomer? Things like recognition for their experience and their legacy that they bring, the consistency in the organization or in their field, and their expertise. What's their communication style? Baby boomers tend to be a bit more formalized, a bit more direct. They prefer organization and planning around interactions. They like to schedule things out because of the upbringing that they had, because of the experiences, the life things that have been normalized in their world during that period of time, has structured in many ways how they think and how they perform as professionals in 2025, 2026 now. What about Gen Xers? You have to understand Gen Xers went through significant, what we call transition, or they came from a transition era. Because now we're going from a post-war scenario to now we have industrialization at an entirely another level. Now we have where things are shifting. We went from economic depression to growth to uncertainty and eventual depression again. In the midst of all of that, the emergence of new technology. Now computers are entering school systems and workplaces. We're going from manual to a bit more automated processes in the context of the Gen X era. The importance to now be able to function independently in a world that's so uncertain also fostered a lot of pragmatism. So what do I do with that? Well, I want, in this generation, brought up in this shifting dynamic culturally and economically, autonomy became important, efficiency became important, the emergence of production management systems and methodologies, even the emergence of lean principles, all those things came within that Gen X era. So trying to be efficient, wearing multiple hats, carrying multiple bags, well, communication shifts, a bit more brief, a bit more straightforward. We don't have time for fluff. We don't have time for we got to be able to react. What about Gen Yers, that millennial generation? Now the digital revolution is among that generation. Right? This idea that, look, we can't be too autonomous because innovation and adoption comes through collaboration. Understanding now that this generation really became focused on, oh my goodness, maybe we should care a bit more about multicultural dynamics that are influencing the workplace. How do we become a bit more societal focused, community focused? This generation made a shift from a core value standpoint to being more purpose driven. This idea of growth and sustainability. This generation was more prone to desire more feedback and opportunities for personal growth and development. And I want to do more meaningful work. It was no longer about just being efficient or just hunkering in and locking in for the sake of building experience and expertise in this thing. How do I feel about the work that I'm performing? How am I working well with others in a collaborative manner to execute? How do I leverage the innovations that have come out of prior generations and my current generation and lean into that and not be so analog or antiquated? So I want I want to look at digital opportunities for communication over manual. Hey, I'm probably more likely to engage you over an email than pick up the phone and call you. That shift started to happen around that millennial generation. Then you have your Gen Y, or excuse me, Gen Z. Your Gen Z generation is immersed in the social media era, not just digital anymore. Social media became the construct by which communication is facilitated, understanding is facilitated, this innovation and growth in tech as a foundation to the tools and resources that only foster their academic development and growth, but their social interaction and even how they execute work. With all this access to and visibility to information and all the information sharing, transparency became a heightened point of consideration, focus, and interest. Building trust through transparency became essential and foundational to the core values of Gen Zers. This emphasis around diversity and really authenticity. Pardon any background noise you have. I'm outside, and then, unfortunately, I don't own the world environment around me. Security, inclusivity are motivators for that Gen Z workplace or workforce. And then, of course, communication style shifts. Right now, we go to look. It's all about speed, tech-oriented, highly visual. That's where we get the text messaging. That's where we get the emojis. That's where we get the abbreviations to full words and terms and phrases as a means to effectively and efficiently communicate in real time. Now, I love this graphic because I created it as a simplified way of articulating something that's really complex. Everything I shared, really, there's underpinnings and nuances, but it gives you a nice understanding of, okay, I can start to understand where the generational shifts and potentially even the breakdowns in communication is stemming from. I can start to understand what's shaping each generation, and that influences not only their core values and motivators, but how they approach communication. We can't ignore these things. We have to understand them in order to then do something with it. So, on the spectrum of a multi-generational workforce, this is a nice way to understand the core values that drive how they engage, how they interact, and how they inform their decision making. So, just if you don't remember anything, keep these core value constructs in mind. Baby boomers, stability, loyalty, experience grounds the baby boomer generation. Gen X, independence, pragmatism, efficiency grounds the Gen X generation. For millennials, collaboration, purpose, feedback grounds this generation. And finally, for Gen Zers, innovation, authenticity, tech fluency grounds this generation. So how do I take that understanding and and apply it? Well, it starts with self-understanding, self-reflection. I want you to just think about which generational description fits you best. It doesn't fall within the technical generation based on when you were born. And are there any other characteristics that maybe you didn't hear or that I didn't speak to that you believe really ground you? Because it's important to self-reflect and understand what those nuances are. Because as you start to reach out as leaders and seek to understand this multi-generational workforce or peer group, considering your own nuances will help you better empathize and seek understanding and awareness about those nuances characteristically among those with whom you work with or lead within the workplace. Now, the reality is, because of all those varying core value constructs and communication styles and approaches, what are the top 5 challenges that we see? Here they are among a multi generational workforce. Top 5, communication barriers being number 1. Not uncommon just in the human experience, right? Conflict in terms of work preferences, work styles, and approaches, right? technology adoption being the number three, work-life balance priorities. I mean, how often have you observed or heard this conflict and debate around what it means to be committed, efficient, effective, dedicated to work execution? Where are those priority breakdowns that you're seeing in your workplace? And finally, generational biases, just those same biases that subconsciously inform how we communicate and even our decision making, are among the contributing factors to the challenges we see in trying to navigate a multi-generational workforce. The reality is that these clashes start with a foundation of trust and respect. How we define respect. The boomer generation tends to look at the world through the lens of tenure, legacy, knowledge, understanding, in the context of I can respect you in your role, your position, your authority through that lens. Remember the construct that informs that. Gen Zers often look at respect through the lens of I am a human, I have my own thoughts and ideas and perspectives, and I have a voice, and I want to share that voice. And my capacity to do so and your openness to receive it is how I view or measure the level of respect we have for one another. It doesn't mean both are wrong or right. It means that understanding those perspectives start to inform how we approach communication and engagement with one another. When we think about flexibility, right? For a Gen Xer, look, I perceive flexibility in the context of autonomy. Give me my space to get my, and I will get it done. And when you don't give that to me, I feel micromanaged. I feel like you don't view me with the level of expertise or understanding that I actually have. Whereas for millennials, well, look, if you don't care about my wellness, then I have concerns. I don't believe you're being flexible with me. If I need to take off to take care of something, I want to be able to do so. I don't want you to frown upon my decision to take a personal day, or my decision to need a mental health day, or my decision to want to do what's right for me or for my family. A Gen Zer may view flexibility through the lens of expectation. What I envision or expected as an outcome, and how much latitude I have in that expectation, is how I view flexibility. So variation in perspectives, again, often create challenges in dynamic and understanding how we move forward. The reality is, younger generations move at a faster pace because of the tools and resources that have been presented to them, and because of this experience of everything moving so rapidly. Innovations, especially tech innovations, changes in everything. How quickly does a new style of clothing come out? How quickly does a new cell phone comes out? How quickly does a new app receive an update? How quickly does things change around us, to the extent that imagine the urgency that a younger generation feels to have to move with rapid iteration. Whereas the older generations, coming from challenges around decisions that have been made that had economic and social implications, risk mitigation becomes more of a priority. What are the implications of decisions? I can't move so fast that I don't consider these things because the outcome could be detrimental. Both aren't wrong or necessarily right. It's more about understanding that the speed versus accuracy tension informs how these multi generations engage and interact, but also think through problems and opportunities across the organization and collaboratively. Knowing that these tensions exist starts to help us inform. So instead of reacting on the basis of our assumptions around these generations or the dynamics that may exist. Pardon the sirens. Ask yourself, is this a people issue or a generational lens issue? Is this a challenge I'm navigating on the basis of my lack of consideration or understanding of what could be a generational nuance, or is this something else? What context could be shaping this individual's perspective, disposition, idea, because it may be grounded in something that I'm not considering. And oftentimes it has a lot to do with the value, motivator, communication constructs at a generational level. So a lot of things that you can ask to start to avoid those assumptions when engaging with a multi-generational workforce. What type of communication help you work best? I know for me, I tend to respond best over email. You send me an email, be clear and concise and direct around what you're looking for or what you're seeking, and I'm going to be more inclined to respond and give you what you need. But what works for you? And their response may be, I prefer you to knock on my door and let's talk it through. And a compromise to that will be, I will do that, and then I'll send a follow-up email to validate our conversation. A younger generation may say, well, I prefer you to just text me so I can get right on it. And then I'll say, well, absolutely. And then as a follow-up, I'd like to just send you an email to validate our conversation or confirm the actions that you're going to be taking. These type of things, that's just one example of many. These type of dialogues help us to mitigate the conflicts and the barriers across generations. How do you prefer feedback? What motivates you besides compensation? What makes you get up every day and drive you to come to work every day? Understanding those nuances helps to break down and one, mitigate assumptions and break down some of the tensions that otherwise shape us, oftentimes rooted in bias or that aren't even necessarily accurate or true relative to the individuals we're interacting with. So as we start to understand these generations and we just touch the surface of some of the factors that influence these generations, now we can get into, okay, how do I lead with intentionality, knowing and embracing the fact that I have a multi-generational workforce? And I want to look at it through environment, culture, and communication. So how do I foster inclusivity among the multi-generational workforce? And then how do I ensure through it all we're communicating effectively? I've simplified this in a way that we can really chew on, right? If we can do these three core kind of pillars to alignment and effective communication, you're going to see a drastic change in shift in dynamic among your multi-generational workforce. Align expectations publicly, offer choice in how work is completed, and implement some capacity for recognition that makes sense for the audience or the population you're working with or leading. Consistently, when I've seen shifts in effort around those three pillars, we start to see a fundamental shift in the dynamics among a multi-generational workforce, where you're taking into consideration the factors that influence all of those workforces. So when we say align expectations publicly, listen, because of those factors that influence our different approaches to work execution and communication, let's just all get on the same page. It doesn't mean we all have to agree. It's more about, okay, there's a foundation to this, and then there's some expectations I may have as a leader. So I don't have to necessarily have 15 different ways of doing something because I have all these different generations. It's more about saying, okay, everyone agrees that this needs to be executed within this time frame. Okay, we're all there. Response time expectations. All right. So when we come together and we're working through this, let's just all agree that, listen, if you're going to be on your device, let's be clear about you're on your device because you're taking notes, not because you're responding to emails. I need you to be present in the room. Listen, I need you to trust your people on the floor. I don't need you to responding unless it's emergent. I want you to really be present. I want you to be prepared. I want you to come prepared. I want you to be able to contribute. Setting meeting culture guidelines, those are just a couple of examples. Even down to collaboration protocols. Hey, let's all agree that we're all going to meet in these constructs in these formats. And all of these things start to ensure that we can reduce misinterpretation around how expectations were going to be fulfilled, how things were going to be communicated, how things were going to be executed. Just level setting those core things and aligning publicly, meaning we're going to announce it and discuss it in the next meeting. We're going to follow up over written correspondence and validate that we all agree that these are the terms of engagement. Those things help every generation better and effectively work together to get to a desired outcome. Offer choice. Different generations tend to work differently. It doesn't mean that those are wrong ways of working or executing. And we have to give ourselves latitude to offer how work is executed. Doesn't mean that they all get to do the things that are required differently. Some things have highly complex, compliance-oriented tasks or activities that have to be done. That's not what we're suggesting. But what we are suggesting is some groups decide that they want to organize their task and organize those things that are necessary to execute differently. Boomers tend to lean more heavily, for example, on project planning and kind of outlining those nuanced steps. Millennials tend to use more of agile workflows for their capacity to have a little autonomy in how things are getting done and respond to emergent needs. That's the era they come from. Gen Zers want more real-time feedback, updates, insights that guide their execution and decision making. It's okay to have multiple pathways to execution as long as we're all in alignment to the goal and the outcome. So give yourself and your team members capacity to choose how work is going to be executed. And of course, look, recognition, everyone at the fundamental Maslow hierarchy of needs for human beings psychologically feed off of some form of acknowledgement or recognition for contribution, for expertise, for insight, or what have you. It doesn't mean everyone needs a trophy, doesn't mean everyone needs a pat on the back. Fundamentally, that reinforcement around our unification to achieve a certain goal is still necessary. But how we approach it does vary. And consider that generationally. Boomers and millennials, what we've seen statistically, lean more heavily on the public praise scenario, whereas Gen Xers may want more privatized an acknowledgement. Gen Zers, hey, they respond to things that, hey, I'm gonna do a group text shout out. Hey, I'm gonna do an announcement. I may even send you a quick email. Whatever that may be, it tends to be in more of a digitized format. Whatever that looks like, just consider the population. Going back to those avoiding assumption questions, ask. That's the power in all of this is foundationally, as you saw, the biggest barrier in a multi-generational dynamic is communication breakdowns. If we open ourselves up to seeking understanding, we will far better respond to the needs of a multi-generational workforce. This is just a pathway for you to do that effectively and take action. Effective communication is gonna come through clarity, communication with the what I call the 5-1 rule, and we'll talk about that, and approaching things more like a coach than a boss. And so let's unpack that. Look, when we're trying to drive execution, sometimes we use language and we have perspectives that are presumptive in terms of our communication and our reception of their understanding of what we're looking for as an outcome. So when we say things like we got to get it done, what does that really mean? What does done mean? What does completion mean? What does the end mean to me? What output am I looking for? The more I can define it, or if I can seek clarity around those things, the better in alignment we have together and how we're driving execution. Define done, define urgency, define decision rights. So, to what extent am I giving you autonomy to make decisions around the execution of this thing? And if I can tell you upfront what that looks like, the less likely you're going to respond to any input or perspective I give as micromanagement. Furthermore, the 5-1 role becomes really effective in ensuring that my delivery and approach has a higher probability of reception and understanding. So for any message, share it in 5 different ways, but one consistent narrative. I may approach my communication around expectation. I may say it verbally, and I may state it in 2 different ways, and then I will seek validation of your understanding. I may then say that as a follow-up, I'm going to send it over email, and I'm going to ask for a reply validating that you received it and that you understand it. And then I may do another point of communication and check in to validate that you're on the right path of progress in terms of how we expect to realize an outcome. So I just described different ways of reinforcing the message around outcomes that we both align around, which is going to drastically improve not only our communication, but the probability of us getting to that desired outcome. And then finally, I've always found that no matter what the generation, if you practice more of a coaching communication style, you're going to tend to receive less barrier and pushback. Instead of just simply advising, this is what you need to do and how you need to do it. Everyone's at a different level of understanding and application. So asking before advising really helps. And it's not asking with naivety or a misrepresentation of ignorance around the thing. It's simply to say, I respect at whatever level of understanding you have around this thing that I'm asking you to do, and I want to give you space to share that before I insert my assumptions around what you know and don't know. Because have you ever been asked to do something and then the person goes down a rabbit hole trying to tell you what you think needs to happen, and you're looking at them like, I'm almost insulted by you sharing that? Because they never gave you space to share what do you already know. And do you anticipate being stuck anywhere that I can already position myself to provide support around? Or in my check-in, I'm going to ask you, are you stuck? Because if you're not stuck, then I'm going to allow you to keep on this trajectory that you're on. What support can I provide you instead of assuming my support? Oh my goodness, these things go so far in empowering an individual to execute, no matter what generation they are. There's different approaches that we can take, but nonetheless, these are fundamental to really fostering effective communication and bridging some of those breakdowns. So really shifting those communication approaches help you to shift the dynamic among your team members. These are just some micro behaviors that I've outlined to help you quickly apply it, even today, tomorrow. Subtleties. For example, replace "we've always done it this way" with "show me your approach." Even if you believe that your way is best practice, your way is defined, be open to saying, well, how would you approach it? And then as a coach, you may also provide input as to why that approach may or may not be as effective as they think it is. Replace "they don't want to work" with "what does support look like for you?" Our observation or perception that some generations are lazy or don't want to work is simply false. Some of our hardest workers are those of the millennial generations, for example. But understanding that we have to shift our mindset in order to shift the dynamic. So what does support look like for you? How can I help you mobilize around this thing? Imagine applying that same shift even in the context of conversations with our own children. Replace "that's not how it's done" with "help me understand your rationale." How many times have we delegated or deployed our team members to execute, and then we're standing back watching, saying, "Oh my goodness, this is completely adverse to the standard operating procedure or the best practice." Imagine how defeating it is to then burst that person's bubble who believes that they're actually making progress, doing it effectively. So a subtle shift in help me understand why that's working for you or your rationale behind that thing starts to open up a dialogue and reception to one, insights or innovations that we weren't aware of, as well as input that we can provide in a less defensive manner. These small shifts really help us reduce that defensiveness and really create enough psychological safety to say, to share across generations what is working, what are we struggling with, what aren't we doing as best as we'd like to do. And it opens ourselves up to be psychologically safe enough to receive new perspectives and insights to get things done, especially when we share the same goal and objective. Some more diagnostic questions to help shift that communication and establish those quick wins. What type of communication helps you work best? How do you receive feedback? What motivates you? What does flexibility mean? Don't forget those questions because they open you up to that psychologically safe dialogue. And finally, as we talk about we understanding the generation, starting to apply more effective communication from a multi-generational standpoint and really leaning into those things that we once saw as a divisive nuance or characteristic could actually be a strength builder for us. How do we then turn that diverse construct of a workforce into a competitive advantage? So I want to look at it through real and true application of what we're talking about, but also strengths-based leadership and problem solving through the lens of this diverse work group, leveraging those intergenerational strengths as a competitive advantage in the marketplace, as well as addressing the challenges that come with that. So, strength utilization strategies across generations. I want you to really lean on this graphic, but for the sake of time, I just want to cover a few key points. For boomers, if you have boomers in your organization, that's your legacy generation in many cases. And when I say legacy, that doesn't mean they've been with your organization long necessarily. It could simply mean their legacy in their expertise or field. The reality is use them. Use them for their knowledge. They are your knowledge anchors in the business oftentimes. They could be process experts. They could be service mentors. Don't find that because they're close to retirement or because they are older that they could be dismissed or, oh, Bob is good over there. Just let him keep doing what he's doing. Pull Bob in. Don't assume he's interested. Don't assume he's not interested. Give him capacity to share those interests. Let them know the new innovations. Tell them about the new continuous improvement group that's being implemented. Because the insights and perspectives that these individuals have could transform the innovations, the ideation, and the results that are coming from the business. So assign them things like policy shaping, technical training, the cross-generational coaching. All right, I'm gonna put Bob with Jackie. I'm gonna put Sue with Timmy. It has a profound fundamental impact on an organization and their dynamics multi-generationally. For Gen Xers, make them stability accelerators. And it's okay to have your pragmatists. You need the people saying that I'm a little more risk averse. I know what this could lead to if we don't consider these factors. Allow that group to have those conversations. Assign them things like troubleshooting, problem prioritization, change management. These things become essential in protecting the organization, considering the nuances and factors that may influence or become barriers to success. Lean in on that. Don't look at the individual as, oh, here Robbie goes with their pragmatism. Oh, he never wants to look at new ideas. See it as a way to say, you know what, that's a good consideration that we need to take to apply to this move that we're looking to make, or this investment, or this change organizationally or in process. Makes a huge difference in the outcomes for an organization. for millennials, position them in more of this collaborative space, put them in this architectural context where they can build new things, that they can be champions around the shift that you're trying to drive in your workplace culture, or new ideas, new policies, new processes. That's a great generation of to serve in that ambassadorship capacity. My team has developed ambassador programs that have been implemented across organizations as a catalyst to change management and growth across an organization. It's driven so much more ownership and adoption around change because we've embraced that generation as leaders in that regard. Assign them things like team facilitation, transformation initiatives, customer experience centric activities. Make them a central point in the growth of an organization. Similarly, for Gen Z, empower them as the catalyst to innovation, especially as it relates to technology. Lean into the fact that they're in a digital era. Lean into the fact that they are keeping track of trends and things. You may have a legacy core technology in your business. Imagine mobilizing your millennial and Gen Z, or especially your Gen Z leaders or team members to say, hey, I know we've been using this platform for years. I want you to do some research. Here's the core functionality. And by the way, speak to some of our Boomer and Gen X team members because they have some perspective around what has worked and not worked over the years. And then consider all those things and look at new innovations and technology that we should be leveraging. Look at these new AI inputs that could potentially shift how we do things more effectively and efficiently. But be sure to consult our Gen X population in terms of all of the risk or historically what we've encountered when we didn't consider those things. Now, of course, you're not going to necessarily categorize your team members in a formal way of Boomer, Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z. That's not their full identity, but it does shape how they engage, how they interact, and how they make decisions. So having some awareness around what that is and how you start to pull these groups together becomes essential. Hoping it's starting to really click for you all. Now we have some frameworks that I found that work. I'm just sharing just a few. If you want to know, well, how do I do that though? Like, what are some ways that I can start to bring people together? The buddy pairing model, the strengths-based workflow design, and the innovation huddles. These are just three best practices that I've applied with other clients and I've seen work in other organizations. Buddy pairing is simply pairing two people from different generations together. Mutual knowledge transfer. They're shadowing one another and understanding how both approaches work execution. And it becomes more of a reverse mentoring model without them even realizing it. I'm showing you things, you're showing me new things. I'm showing you how effective this may be. I'm showing you things accordingly. You start to almost reverse mentor. Strength-based workflow design exercise is simply having everyone across multi-generations list how they complete a specific task. Maybe they all work within the same department. And then look, there are strengths that they have around execution of certain tasks. There are things that are just painful for them, they're not really great at. Let's identify who naturally excels at different things, especially from a generational context, and then reassign responsibilities instead of seeing it as a barrier. Oh Lord, Barb is takes 15 hours to do this one thing. I don't know why she just won't drag this Excel field down and copy it. Why are we doing that to ourselves? Instead of saying, okay, there are things that Barb's really effective at, and there are things that I could actually transfer to Barb because she's really effective, and the things that Jackie or Susie may be less effective in could transfer and vice versa. That becomes a highly more effective model in leveraging the strengths multi-generationally instead of seeing them as barriers or forcing this cookie cutter model around execution. And finally, innovation huddles. I find these to be extremely effective and impactful. Just mini sessions, 10, 15, 20 minutes, where people are just coming together and saying, hey, we all work together in the same department or the same manufacturing line or the same whatever. What's one thing I could streamline coming out of my reflecting from the last month, the last week, the last quarter? one idea I could streamline, one outdated process that I think we should retire, and one risk that I should anticipate. And foster open dialogue multi-generationally around those three things. Allow everyone. You're going to not only find commonality, which creates unity, you're also going to realize others are going to hear points of perspectives, insights, considerations that will influence how they make decisions as they go forward. Those simple yet impactful frameworks really start to enable you to not just take all that I'm saying, but actually apply it accordingly. The reality is, we know that there are challenges that exist. We see the top 5 challenges. What do I do with them? These are just practical solutions that you can apply today. Look, let's start with just structuring our communication templates. Do I have agendas for every meeting? Do I have frameworks for how I communicate that works unilaterally across generations in my organization? I have resistance to change. Look, let's establish multi-generational champions to serve as ambassadors for the change that's to come. I see entitlement on one end of the spectrum or rigidity on the other end of the spectrum around my organization or my team members. What if I reframe expectations? What if I applied that kind of public sharing model that I discussed earlier and created a bit more clarity around the individual, their role, and outcomes? And as long as we're all in alignment to the desired outcome, I may have some latitude or flexibility around what that looks like. So I'm not too rigid, but I'm not also creating this culture of embedded entitlement either. I have some friction around feedback when it's shared or when it's given. What if I provided more proactive input around what I'm observing, so that it's not a slap in the face and in this blindside approach to communication around what's working, what's not working for those organizations who only ever talk about or provide feedback on an annual review? What if I establish more micro feedback loops, less formalized, less documented, so that when it does come down to the more formalized, documented feedback opportunities, nothing's being shared that's of shock? If there are technology gaps, what if I just applied this reverse mentoring model that I spoke of, where I help the bridge an understanding from a technological utilization point of view? Instead of seeing the individuals as barriers, I see them as an opportunity to pull in. These subtle practical solutions start to really help you get after what is common across many organizations. So I encourage you to really explore those ideas and those quick wins. Here's another snapshot of some things you can do just over the next few weeks. Whether it's alignment sessions, establishing more normalization around how you want to approach communication, applying that whole reverse mentoring model that we spoke of, and then recognition matrix based on the feedback you receive around what works best for the individuals across your work group or your team. It starts with just simple steps that we can take to leverage how we can come together more effectively and how we communicate and how we execute as a multi-generational team. With that being said, I thank you for tuning in. I hope that you found one morsel of insight or perspective that you can apply to the workplace today as a leader. If you want to follow up or learn more just about best practices or how this could make sense for your organization, check us out on the web, lightpointadvisors.com. You can find us on any major social media platform. You can also scan the QR code and schedule time directly with me as well, so we can keep this dialogue going, sharing those best practices, help advance what this looks like across your organization. That being said, thanks again.